As you know, that the EGROW Foundation is always looking for contemporary issues, mainly those related with policy implications. It's a policy think tank with focus on policy-oriented research and recommendations for policy making. It is in this context that we have had nearly 60 weekly sessions where we have had the best minds across the world to come and speak to us, including two Nobel laureates. We have had policymakers, social researchers, also we have had academicians. We have had a few book launches also on our weekly webinar. It is in this context that today we have invited the authors of this latest book on post-COVID recovery in Punjab. The three authors have been kind enough to be here with us today. And Professor Kuldeep Kaur, head of the department of three different departments actually at Guru Nanak Dev University, and my classmate, is chairing the session today. Right now, Professor Kuldeep is also is also chairing the Ambedkar Chair at Guru Nanak Dev University. She's been a scholar, a researcher, and at different points of time wearing different hats as head of the Department of Economics, Social Sciences, and Management. Having been in Punjab for nearly 3.5 decades and worked on Punjab areas, I thought that Professor Kuldeep will be the best fit to chair the session because the focus of the book is Punjab. With this, I hand over the session to Professor Kuldeep to carry on the discussion further. Professor Kuldeep, please.
Thank you, Professor Charan, for giving such an elaborate introduction to which for me, which I do not deserve, even I think so. So all here are my friends as far the discussants are concerned, and including you, sir, please. At the onset, firstly, let me thank EGROW Foundation for giving me this opportunity to be part of this discussion, which is going to be, I think, very, very fruitful for it. And also, I would like to, firstly, on behalf of EGROW Foundation, would like to welcome all the discussants, all the four discussants, and the participants in this webinar. My congratulations are also due for all the three editors of this book who has come out with this wonderful work, which is, I think, first in the line as far as the work on COVID is concerned, and that too a great publication by Palgrave Macmillan, which carries about more than 20 papers of quality research articles. So my congratulations to all the three editors for doing such a wonderful job thereby. And all of us know about this, that COVID-19 has shook the whole world. So is in case of Punjab economy, and particularly being an agricultural economy and MSME dominated, we can see that Punjab has affected worstly as far as its agriculture sector is concerned, MSMEs are concerned, its urban informal sector is concerned, its education sector is concerned, as well as above all there had been the migration crisis, which have caused a great loss to the agriculture sector and to particularly the MSMEs, which are the main employment intensive sectors in the Punjab economy. So thereby, in the light of this, I think that today's discussion is the most relevant and contemporary discussion which is going to be there to be held on, because as for this book, its title, it is clear that the COVID-19 pandemic and economic development, which is emerging public policy lessons for Indian Punjab. So as far this presentation is concerned, we're having an overview about this. I can come to know, or I can share with all the participants, that this presentation is going to offer a comprehensive analysis of the pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 situation and public policy measures needed to revive the economy in the light of the recent initiatives by the state government, particularly including that this book suggests, I probably suggest include a committee to suggest post COVID-19 revival strategy, So, as far this book is concerned, I think this is a collection of essays by specialized authors in their area of research, which examine basically the impact of COVID-19 in the larger context of economic and developmental context of Punjab. So, ranging from basic developmental transformation analysis to the specific policy issues in each sector and policy domain, which includes a larger development crisis in the context of the regional economy and society of Punjab. I think that this book includes the different sectors which have been analyzed are the agriculture, which is which has also included the dairy sector, which was also worstly affected, because I have seen that how the milk was just like sold 2 rupees per kg or 3 rupees per kg, because its supply chain was disrupted, and it has also considered the agricultural markets as well, which has been worstly affected during the COVID, covering the industry, services, education, health, besides the fiscal banking, diaspora, gender issues, governance, and sustainability challenges of the state economy. So this book particularly dwells on the sector-specific issues as well as ways forward for betterment of livelihoods of those engaged, especially the farmers and the industrial and the services sector informal workers. So, in the light of this, I think all the four speakers chosen over here for this webinar are the most relevant speakers, which will be having sharing their first-hand information while going through all these through the process of editing this book. So, I think. Rather than wasting more time for giving this background to this webinar, we should start, because already we have it's already 4 going to be 4:20, and there are four speakers in the webinar. I think we should allot 15 to 18 minutes. If the house agrees to me, we should allot 15 to 18 minutes to each speaker, so that we have some time for fruitful discussion, or we have, if we have some queries, crisp queries, we can satisfy those queries. If the house agrees, then I think I should firstly call upon the first speaker as well as the editor of the book, that is Professor Dr. Lakhwinder Singh. I think he has already joined.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
but
sir,
I think
please.
that the sequence should be first is Sukhpal and second is Kamal,
That's right.
third is
That's
myself.
right, as we wish. So let me give the first call to Professor Dr. Sukhpal Singh. Just to give a brief background to Professor Dr. Sukhpal Singh for the audience or for the participants, let me say that Professor Dr. Sukhpal Singh is a professor and former chairperson, Center for Management in Agriculture, IIM Ahmedabad. He is the former Director General, Center for Research in Rural and Industrial Development, that is CRED Chandigarh, and former professor and head Agricultural Economic Research Unit, Institute of Economic Growth, New Delhi. He has been conferred the title of the Fellow of the Indian Society of Agricultural Economics for his contribution to the discipline and the society in 2018. He is founding co-editor Millennial Asia, an international journal of Asian studies. If I talk about his publications, then I can say that he has 12 books to his credit, and the latest being the Institutional Innovations in the Delivery of Farm Services in India, which is a Springer publication. And he also has published more than 150 research papers in international or national journals or edited books, besides having the 70 articles in newspapers and magazines. He is on the boards of many non-profit workings in the agriculture and the rural space, and he had been visiting fellow to various international universities as well as national universities. To name a few is the Sussex University, Copenhagen Business School, Denmark, and he has been a member of various committees as well. Particularly, he was attached with the Niti Ayog, to say a few. So again, if I go through the detailed biodata of Professor Dr. Sukhpal Singh, then it will take much more time. So it's better that I should hand over the mic to Professor Dr. Sukhpal Singh to share his views regarding this COVID-19 or for today's main theme of the webinar, please. Over to Professor Dr. Sukhpal Singh, please.
Thank you, Professor Kuldil Kaur. How many minutes I have?
You can continue, I think, probably within 15 minutes if you can, please,
Okay.
so that I wish that more discussion should be there.
Okay, so I'm not very clear about the division of labor between three of us, but I would just maybe give the introduction to the book and then
okay.
Talk more about.
If you so wish that you want to take more time and accordingly your co-editors want to take lesser time, then accordingly you can take your time, please.
Okay, so this is the book which has been edited by three of us, and I'm thankful to Charan and the EGROW Foundation and to the chair, Professor Kuldil Kaur, for making this possible and introducing us in a manner which is very humbling. So this book, as the chairperson mentioned, has 23 contributed chapters, and this comes from almost 3 dozen people who are not only economists but also social scientists and development studies experts based in India, in Punjab, and even in other countries. So it's really a global perspective on Punjab's pandemic situation, as well as Punjab's general economic development and governance issues, which are very uppermost in everybody's mind now because of the upcoming elections and just concluded farmers' agitation. So the main purpose of this, which actually evolved out of a series of policy briefs, which Lakhwinder had organized while he was heading the department and the Center for Innovation and Development Studies at Patiala. So we wanted to examine each and every sector and subsector and issue of the state economy and to come out with some kind of tentative way forward on how do we govern Punjab better and develop Punjab better. So from there, we further thought that since pandemic has happened, we also need to incorporate this issue and then look at what has changed and what needs to be done in terms of different policy concerns. So this is basically intended for public policy debate and discussion and way forward, but also there are many lessons for other stakeholders, whether NGOs or cooperatives or farmer unions or anybody who has a stake in Punjab's well-being. So it really covers wide range of issues and sectors under 6 sections. I think I don't need to spend too much time on this because Punjab has been known for its levels and nature of development since the late 1960s, mainly for agricultural growth and development, green revolution, and many states and the government of India has been also trying to emulate that in other parts of the country. But there are already issues with this sustainability of this model of Punjab in terms of transformation or transition from agriculture to industry to service, structural transformation, as well as the sustainability of the very agrarian prosperity. And one of the sort of signs of that was the farmer agitation, which happened because suddenly they found that things are moving away from their control and their surroundings in terms of change in policy focus at the national level. So since the 1980s, the state has been struggling with various developmental issues. And this, as my friend Lakhwinder always says, is the situation that 2 parties or combines of parties have ruled for 15 years each in the last 30 years. But the state of affairs remains same, or it has got actually worsened in some way, whether crop diversification or general agricultural growth or Punjab's very development index itself, or the governance of the state in terms of its politics and administration. I think we don't need to go too much into details of what happened during pandemic. Punjab imposed curfew, very strict curfew, and that also exposed the institutional weaknesses of the state in terms of what is there in terms of health infrastructure, education infrastructure, and what is missing, especially the migrant part, because Punjab depends a lot on migrant workers. And also it has a lot of migrants who are working abroad and working in other parts of India. So though the state tried to step in with some food kits, but it was mostly the non-state actors like NGOs and langars from gurdwaras, which saved the day for the needy. The economy suffered major losses across sectors. As Professor Kuldeep Kaur said, agriculture was the least affected. It proved to be very resilient. And let me say that 97% of the farmers in Punjab in the last Rabi season of 2020 were able to sell their wheat at MSP. So that speaks volumes about how resilient agriculture is, or how the systems of agriculture production and marketing in Punjab have become very resilient over time. But there are also other loopholes which we'll come to very soon. If you look at what happened in terms of losses to the economy, then you have from sector to sector, these figures speak for themselves. Loss of employment, loss of GDP, export loss, whether agro or otherwise. The MSME sector, this 40,000 crore loss, this was also quoted in the Punjab Assembly in the last session by the Chief Minister of the state. The dairy sector, which I think Professor Vatta may like to talk more about it. The perishables, whether poultry or piggery or fruits and vegetables, the floriculture, but as I said earlier, food grain sector didn't really suffer much, and farmers didn't suffer much, though they had staggered kind of sale of their produce. Migrant labor was one of the most negatively hit here. There were also a lot of local issues in terms of when migrants moved away, didn't come back in time, then a lot of conflicts on wage rates, and many panchayats actually passing regulations against landless agricultural workers when they started demanding little higher wages or piece rate payments for per acre of paddy transplantation and so on. Gender, yes, there was no major issue because more of men died than women generally in India. But there were many issues for women because when the bread earners moved away, it became difficult for many women-headed households and others. And also the free time with men who were unemployed or out of work also led to excessive domestic work for women, both caring and others. And given the gender disparities in Indian households, they also suffered in terms of lack of nutrition and in some cases also domestic violence because there were husbands at home for too much of the time, without any work. And also in places like Narega, public works program, women were likely to suffer more unemployment because they were not the first preferred workers. Also, they didn't have great opportunity cost. So that was the kind of gender implication of that. So far as loss of education is concerned, our policy brief shows that the poorest 20% household suffered because of online education, because very small percentage of these households, whether in rural or urban Punjab, had access to computers. So children really had tough time. And many private schools closed down, but that also brought in. I think Ritesh Kumar needs to be muted. So, but the good fallout of that private schools closing down was that these kids came back to government schools. So this back to school government school scenario actually is a positive change because otherwise Punjab's government schools were becoming schools only for relatively marginalized community like SC, STs and others who could not afford to send their kids to English medium private schools in neighboring towns or within the village. So we need to really look at this. How do we sustain this back to government school momentum? And agricultural workers, 69% of them being scheduled caste. And this is a very important issue for Punjab now because we're talking about a lot of caste combinations becoming important in the upcoming elections. Punjab has the highest proportion of SC population in the country, 32%. And these people have not mattered in the past, but now they are being talked about at least. And there are even instances of some of these families migrating as far as Gujarat to pick cotton because they don't have good working relations with local farmers who depend too much on migrant labor now. And the state has refused to implement NREGA in the state. State government has refused to implement NREGA, saying it is not relevant for Punjab. So Punjab has one of the least number of days generated per household per year in the country. 38 days in 2021, and highest was, I think, it was only 29 days in 16-17. Funds are not fully utilized. Wage rates are still lower than Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. And the only thing government has done in the previous year's budget is that we would have shops and factories allowed to open for 24 hours so that people can get more wages by working overtime. And the companies and factories have been asked to self-certify for labor laws. So I don't know whether it's upgrading or downgrading of worker concerns. There are baseras for slum dwellers who are local Punjabis, but there's nothing for migrant workers, unlike Kerala's migrant worker hostels. So this is budget provisions government has made in the post-pandemic budget for 21-22. I would skip this and leave Professor Vatta to attend to this. But he would talk about agriculture, rural sector, whether subsidies or where does the crop diversification thing go, or what do we do with the institutional issues with the agriculture sector, or how do we reform agricultural markets. I'll just take a few minutes on this, that if we need to, if Punjab has overstayed in agriculture and we need to move out of agriculture, then what is the best way forward? I think Punjab logically should move to agro-industrialization. But there we need to prioritize looking at the markets first, and then have agriculture production which is market driven, market based, rather than producing and trying to somehow sell, whether at MSP, legal MSP or otherwise, or trying to dispose of that produce. Punjab somehow doesn't figure in the national scheme of things in terms of prioritizing clusters or crops or commodities. If you look at reports like FIDA of 2013 and later on now, this whole clusters which are being made. So one product, one block strategy or one district strategy now, which has been put up by the government of India. Punjab has hardly got anything worthwhile other than honey and some little crops here and there in some districts. Somehow we feel that Punjab needs to plan its production and marketing at the state and zonal level if Punjab wants to move out of wheat and paddy and sustain farmer incomes. It needs to focus on quality, not quantity, grow more, or dab ke ba, raj ke kha, time has passed by. Now we should talk about soch ke ba and soch ke kha. Think before you plow or cultivate, and think before you eat. So we need to look at markets, marketing, and branding. For example, 60% of banana globally is branded. Of course, Punjab doesn't grow any bananas, but what produced from Punjab can be called branded. Similarly, if you're looking at a small scale industry, which Punjab is supposed to be a house of small and medium enterprises or micro enterprises, I think we need to upgrade them. They are growing faster. So those are growing should be taken to medium and large scale levels with incentives so that they can generate adequate employment. Punjab needs a lot of employment of decent type. We need to also promote a lot of institutions which are pro-market, pro-producer, like groups, producer companies, farmer companies, cooperatives, and so on. States like Maharashtra has Maha Grapes and Maha Anaj. Punjab has nothing other than Markfed and Milkfed, which are parastatal agencies. Yeah, not really people's institutions. We need to have a lot of innovation, incubation, and entrepreneurship. And we don't have many such centers in the state in any university. Agro startups are missing. Even farmer producer company, Punjab is the laggard state. It has hardly a few dozen, when states like Maharashtra have a few thousand now. And Punjab is still not positively looking at using this legislation of producer companies and a lot of government of India schemes to leverage them for Punjab's farmers' benefit. And Punjab is still relying too much on state and its apparatus, its institutions to do any kind of development, which has its own limitations. Yeah, I think Punjab needs to promote a lot of such chains and networks where farmers are stakeholders and participants, not working for them, but institutions which work with farmers being at the center of it, and farmer being the either owners or controllers of such enterprises. We need to strengthen the urban informal sector to provide employment or decent livelihood. Informality is good to some extent, but beyond a point, it becomes a weakness, because if you're talking about modern, decent work situations, modern value chains, modern networks, then informality has no place there. So you need to really formalize them, yeah, especially MSME sector, so that they can face the challenges, both internal and external, not only about COVID, but in general of being in that kind of situation. We need to create a lot of demand with public expenditure. If I will come to that issue of where does Punjab stand in terms of its fiscal governance, which Charan would have many things to say about, then it's a pathetic situation. So unless the state invests in the economy, you can't expect a reversal or revival of the situation. There are a lot of institutions in Punjab which need to be revived on the rural development and finance. There are cooperative banks, there are agriculture development banks, there are PACs at the local level which are doing a lot of fantastic work wherever they've been supported. But we need to take them along, not leave them behind. And we perhaps also need to look at urban employment programs like Urban Narega on the lines of rural Narega. Yeah, health and education. We need to return to the public healthcare provisioning from insurance-based and private healthcare. It has played havoc with people's lives. If you look at people who fall below poverty line or rise above poverty line, it is all because they had some death in the family or there's some major illness in the family. So these two things can really put people back by a few years. So the privatization of health and education in Punjab has really put people back by many thousands of rupees on a monthly or yearly basis. So that needs to be brought back, that you cannot do without public provision of health and education. This is the basic aspects of the quality of life, physical quality of life index, or HDI, or whatever you call it today. Yeah. So public provision of health and education is required. Digital divide needs to be bridged. Yeah, we talked about it because look at the Punjab's public resource mobilization expenditure. I did this interstate comparison. Punjab really doesn't figure anywhere decently. Yeah, whether it's own tax share in total revenue receipts, or GST collections, or land revenue, which it has stopped collecting decades back, or spending on police and administration, which is the highest without any reason, or debt servicing, or expenditure on human development, one of the lowest. Yeah, it also underspends up to the extent of 45% on per capita basis, compared with only 2%. Yeah, in Haryana, yeah, and Odisha 4%. Rural development expenditure, one of the lowest. Again, you keep calling yourself agrarian and rural economy, but you don't do anything for it. Similarly, health expenditure, and Punjab spends only 0.9% of the budget on SC, ST, OBC. It's worse than even UP, West Bengal, and Gujarat. And 2/3 of your population is in this category. Isn't it shocking? Yeah, only 13% budget on education, one of the lowest in the country. Yeah, this interesting figure I found was this big announcement made in the budget saying we are going to allocate 5 crores for 7.96 women-headed households. When you do the calculation, it is just 62 rupees and 81 paisa per household. What a joke it is. What a joke for women-headed households. One does speak of gender sensitivity, and one does speak of the resources you are talking about giving to households. 62 rupees and 81 paisa. Yeah, similarly, urban development, less than 1% is spent on that. So if you are talking about, this is I think my last slide, then I will stop and hand over to Professor Vatta. Yeah, I think one of the major explanations of Punjab's lack of development and sloping down the growth and development charts is that it is one of the most mal-governed states in India today, in terms of lack of institutions and mismanagement of institutions. There is a state planning board which has never held its meeting in the last 10 years. At least one has not publicly come to know of it. And recently, the chairperson also ended up writing an article which was against Punjab's own interests. Similarly, Punjab Farmers and Farm Workers Commission, good that it has been made statutory body now, but from a representative stakeholder body, it has been converted into a one-man show. And nobody is in talking about it. District planning boards and Panchayati Raj institutions, they are one of the worst in terms of devolution of functions, functionaries, and funds. APMCs, Punjab is not tired of saying we are the best marketing infrastructure state in the country. For the last 4 decades, no elections have been held to these democratic institutions, which are people's elected bodies. Yeah, you come to Gujarat, you come to Karnataka, Maharashtra, every 5 years, vibrant elections are held to these bodies. They may be corrupt, they may be monopolized, but they are at least democratic here. Punjab has only nominated people, and Punjab has 3 people sitting on one position of the head of the State Agricultural Marketing Board. State has no MSP system of its own, neither MSP declared, not any implementation arm in terms of procuring anything. Punjab keeps screaming, we don't have MSP available for maize or moong or pulses or perishables. But what is Punjab doing at its own level in terms of setting up infrastructure and institutions like Karnataka has done? Karnataka has state farmers, state agriculture cost and price commission. Yeah. And many other states, many other institutions which are playing important role, whether Kerala or Madhya Pradesh. But Punjab is simply not looking at doing anything on its own. Land Leasing Act draft has been proposed and prepared. I've written against it. If it comes into implementation, it will destroy whatever little small farmer interest is left in Punjab. It's going to open up the informal land lease markets, which are already very high. 40% of land in Punjab is being cultivated on lease basis. Reverse tenancy is the norm. So unless we stop some of these legislative and regulatory changes from happening, we are only headed further towards disaster. Unless we engage farmers and their agencies into agro value chains and markets, you cannot bring agrarian revival in Punjab. Thank you very much.
Professor Sukhpal, for giving a wonderful presentation and touching all the issues of Punjab economy. I'm sure that the suggestions you might have made in your book regarding this can be used by the policymakers if they wish so to leapfrog a better life and better state itself. I'm sure about this. Thank you so much for giving a wonderful presentation. Thank you. My next call is for Professor Dr. Lakhwinder Singh. Just to give a brief introduction about him, I may say that Professor.
Please come first, Kamal, and then I will be there. Kamal.
But the sequence given in the.
Yes, I think that Kamal needs agriculture. He has to discuss agriculture, so he should come first to me.
The brochure shared with me comes under this sequence as well, so that's why I am following.
Please
that
change.
Sequence. Doesn't matter.
On my request, please change the sequence.
No, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So let me give a call to Professor Dr. Kamal Vatta. Again, an agricultural economist. Professor Vatta is the head of the Department of Economics and Sociology, Punjab Agricultural University, Ludhiana. He is a gold medalist in PhD from Punjab Agricultural University again. He also topped in the Advanced Diploma in Agricultural Research for Development from International Center for Development. Sorry. He also underwent advanced training in quantitative economics at Columbia University, New York. He has worked extensively on natural resources management, especially groundwater, agriculture policy, integrated rural development, and non-farm sector in India. If I talk again about his publications, then I can say that he has more than 100 publications of international and national repute journals, and has also participated in more than 100 international and national conferences, seminars, and workshops, etc. I'm sure that through this presentation by him, who has such a vast experience in research as well as while going through the editing of this book, we are going to get a lot, and this will prove to be very, very fruitful as far his presentation is concerned. Now it's over to Professor Kamal Vatta, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Kuldeep.
Thank you.
In the beginning, I would like to thank Dr. Charan Singh of the EGROW Foundation for this opportunity to have a discussion, arrange a discussion on this book, and my fellow editors, Professor Sukhpal Singh and Lakhwinder Singh. I want to congratulate both of them because their effort is much more than mine in making this publication a reality. I will not be talking too much on. I will be discussing on the agricultural issues. I think Professor Sukhpal cut it very short, but I probably we could have benefited if we could have talked about agriculture also. I will be talking, having 2 slides on this agriculture. About this publication, I believe it is.
You need to make it a slideshow. You need to make it slideshow.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, now it's okay.
So about this publication, I am sure this is very timely publication in the times of COVID challenge for Punjab economy. The space at which we could make it a reality, it's commendable, and thanks to Professor Sukhpal and Lakhwinder for that. The book has tried to cover all the sectors of Punjab economy. I'll be talking about COVID-19 pandemic and challenges for Punjab agriculture. We realized when we started working on this project, we realized that there were many challenges for Punjab agriculture because at the onset of this COVID-19 pandemic. So it affected the major supply chains in agriculture. Professor Sukhpal mentioned that we normally talked about that Punjab was resilient in countering the effect of COVID-19 pandemic. And one major reason is that we are highly concentrated as the paddy wheat monoculture, and both these crops they are with assured procurement at MSP, and that was one reason why we couldn't feel the adverse effect on the supply chain of these 2 crops. And the studies shown, we collected the data from the entire state, and we found that majority of the farmers, they were able to sell their produce at MSP. And there were some adaptations by the state government, like giving the tokens and staggered procurement, where the farmers had to store their produce for some days in their houses and then go back to the market for selling it. But they didn't face a major problem in marketing of their produce. But if we look into the other sectors, I think the supply chains were majorly affected, like the labor markets, like the seeds, fertilizers, machinery, and the high value crops like fruits and vegetables and dairy sector. So in the input market value chains, I think the major effects were on the seeds, fertilizers, and machinery. And what we found was that the supplies were a little bit restricted, and it has led to an increase in the prices the farmers paid for these inputs. Although there were over the period of time, they could basically have access to these ones, but what we find is that the prices have increased over a period of time, and over time these prices, when even the supply was relaxed, the prices didn't come back. And in case of agriculture labor markets, Professor Sukhpal mentioned it, they were very severely affected because of with the huge return of the migrants to their native states, and there was a large scale unemployment in the non-agriculture sector. So we did one study in recently where we found that, as Professor Sukhpal mentioned again, that the villages where the proportion of farming households were higher, actually the wages could not increase, they didn't increase much as compared to those villages where the proportion of the farming household was less, probably because they did some collusion, and they could control the prices, or they pre-decided that they will not go for wages beyond that limit. One important observation was that in the rural areas, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, there was a return, the migrants returned to their native states, but almost by equal proportion, the non-agricultural workers in the villages, they got unemployed because of the shutdown of the industry and other sectors in the urban areas. So more or less the supply which was expected to come down, that probably was the labor was provided by the other sectors. But because of the anticipation that there is a shortage of labor, the wages in the agricultural labor markets, they increased by around 50 to 60%. But in the recent, in this year, the equilibrium has shifted back to the same situation, that the prices now are back to the normal. But what we find now is that there is a large scale unemployment for the rural areas. And in some villages, because of the unemployment of the migrant workers in the native states, the supply of workers for the agricultural labor, that is more than the pre-COVID period. All these inputs had implications for timely sowing, cost of production, and productivity, because all these things raised the cost of production, and they delayed. Somehow there was a little bit of delay in the operations, and there was a small effect on the productivity. Productivity was not largely affected, but probably in the major crops like paddy and wheat, probably 1% to 2% decline in productivity was there. But in other output supply chains like high value crops like fruits and vegetables, even the first 3 months or 4 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, we estimated that there were about 500 to 750 crores of losses in the with the farmers in the state. And these losses, they came due to the perishability of the crop within the field, and at the same time fall in the prices due to squeezing, due to the disruption of the supply chains in the urban areas. Though paddy and wheat were less affected, other crops suffered, and especially fruit. And then there was a huge impact on dairy and allied sector value chains. We could not estimate. There is a paper by Professor Naresh Singla which has given the estimates of this. It talks about the disruptions, but what is being observed till now is that whatever disequilibrium has emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have not been able to come back to the same level of equilibrium just now. So we are still away from that previous equilibrium, and we are moving at a lower level equilibrium because of non-adjustments of the situation before the pandemic. And some adaptations for marketing, keeping in mind the physical distancing norms, they worked effectively. But all these challenges inspired the authors to contribute on various aspects of agricultural economy. And I will talk about what the contributions. There were contributions that covered the issues of sustainability, agriculture production, crop residue management, agriculture markets, dairy industry, and home gardens in this book. And they have contributed, some new ideas and new suggestions how we can move ahead in the coming times. For agriculture sustainability, the book highlights the need for crop diversification, risk reduction, electricity pricing, groundwater conservation, and soil conservation. Professor Sukhpal has talked about diversification and other things, and probably some of the flaws in that. But there are suggestions in the book on how we have to move ahead. Then the book has talked about the need to strengthen the agro machinery service centers and supply chains with local participation. I think agro machinery service centers or cooperatives, which Professor Sukhpal has talked about, they can really show a positive light in future, because there are more than 1,300 or 1,500 cooperative societies which are economically viable, and they have very viable agro machinery service centers, and this model can be replicated by strengthening the cooperatives which are not effectively functioning, by looking into some other mechanism where those can be revived. And these are the models where which these centers have shown that they are economically viable themselves, and they have helped in reducing the debt burden or cost, investments of the farmers at their own level by providing the rental services of machinery and other inputs. For crop residue management, it outlines short and medium-term measures such as increasing awareness and crop diversification. And although it is a difficult, there are 3 years of 1,100 crore of subsidy moving into the crop residue management in the state of Punjab and other Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh. And there are many studies being undertaken now on the effectiveness of them. But there are some suggestions in the book to look into this challenge, which is very huge. And the book has talked about the need for reforming and strengthening the markets, and the book outlines the importance of market infrastructure and aggregation with greater involvement of farmers. And it is true that the farmer producer organizations, they are almost non-existent in Punjab. If we compare it with Gujarat, Maharashtra, and other states, we probably have to start from the beginning, and we have to go a long way. And the book calls for creation of local milk grids, increasing capacity of milk fed, revamping dairy cooperatives and milk producer companies. At the last, I would like to mention one important thing is that this book it's a very easy but very valuable read for all the readers, and to the researchers. I believe it provides the inspiration to continue the work on the areas which have been disrupted by COVID-19 pandemic, because as I mentioned earlier, that there is a huge disequilibrium created by COVID-19 pandemic, and probably we are still not at the same level of equilibrium which we were before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So probably whenever there are many researchers now probably which are working on, even in the Department of Economics and Sociology at PAU, we have started working on a few ideas to have a better understanding of the things which have been mentioned in the book. So we have started working on the labor issues and the unemployment issues in the rural areas, and then disruptions in some supply chains in the agriculture sector. So with this, I end up, and I thank you, Dr. Kuldeep, again, and I look forward for the remarks of Dr. Lakhwinder. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vatta, for sharing and highlighting the issues covered in the book by the book on the agriculture sector, which is, I think, the backbone of the Punjab economy. I am sure that the suggestions again given for the agriculture sector will prove to be much useful for the economy to revive the agriculture sector or to come out of the effect of the COVID-19. Thank you so much, Professor Vatta. Again,
stop sharing. Yeah, the screen is still visible. Yeah.
So, can I now next give my call to Professor Lakhwinder Singh?
Yes.
Am I right now, Professor Lakhwinder?
Yes.
Just again to introduce for those who are the new to who are attending this webinar. For this, just briefly, I would commit that Professor Dr. Lakhwinder Singh is emeritus professor. Currently, he is emeritus professor in economics, commerce and management at Khalsa College, Punjab University, Patiala. Prior to this, he had been professor and head department of economics, Punjab University, Patiala, where his brainchild, he has founded Center for Development Economics and Innovation Studies. He is the founding editor of a very prestigious journal, which is Millennial Asia, and it is an international journal of Asian studies and being published by SAGE, which is again indexed in Scopus as well. And he has 9 books to his credit and more than 100 articles in various reputed journals and leading national dailies. He has authored Agrarian Distress and Farmer Suicides in North India, which is again published by Routledge in 2020. Professor Singh is also a coordinator of Indialix, which is a chapter of Globalix in India. He has held several visiting positions, which includes, to name a few, that is Yale University, USA, Seoul National University, South Korea. His specialization is development economics, innovation systems, regional economics, area studies, and Punjab economy. And more than that, he had been a teacher, because a professor is more a teacher than afterwards is a researcher. That he has experience of more than 32 years, along with the completion of 20 PhD students. So now I think again we are going to get or gain a lot from his wonderful presentation again. Now it's over to Professor Dr. Lakhwinder Singh, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Kuldil, for giving me an opportunity to make a few remarks regarding the book that is COVID-19 Pandemic and Economic Development, Emerging Public Policy Lessons for Indian Punjab, which is actually the co-work done by Professor Sukhpal Singh, Professor Kamal, Vatta, and myself. I think that if we say this is a pioneering work during the COVID period in India, then it is not an exaggeration. And this also shows the vibrancy of the intellectuals. I hope, Dr. Chan, you will be agree with me that the Punjab economists, social scientists, and development studies experts, they are pioneers and very, very vibrant people who have thought of as well as timely contributed to more than 23 policy briefs on Punjab economy. This is not a short achievement, because you will find that during that particular period of time, people were engaged in saving themselves, and the Punjab intellectuals are working to save the economy, society, and polity. So I think this is a great and pioneering effort which has been done by that, and I hope the policymakers in India and abroad can learn a lot of lessons from the kind of treatment to COVID-19 pandemic and economic development has been put forward. And it is circulated widely, because already 99 international libraries, top libraries in the world, are having this book with them. So I think this is very, very important that this document has been available in public domain and is being discussed. This is the third main discussion on this particular book. I have not much to say, because I would like to say I agree with Professor Sukhpal Singh's presentation as well as Professor Kamal Vatta's presentation, but a few are the issues which I think we should focus a little more, and that is the policy lessons which emerge from this book need to be highlighted. So I will be just supplementing with stating, as Professor Sukhpal Singh has already talked about, that Punjab economy has overstayed in agriculture. I would like to argue that this is economic transformation has been on the way out, and you'll find the structural stagnation has occurred. So agriculture continued to occupy a dominant position, which perhaps during the last 40 years period of time, if transformation could have continued, by this time agriculture could have been reduced to a relatively minor sector of the economy, and other sectors could have been vibrant, and the shape of the economy could have been very different. However, the pandemic shock, COVID-19 pandemic shock, has been rare opportunity as well as a challenge, because it has come after more than a century period of time. So people who are the policymaker, politician at this particular point of time might not have thought about this is the kind of issues which perhaps we are expected to face. The whole world was feeling clumsy before this shock, because it was a big bang shock. to all the economies in the world, and perhaps even then during that particular period of time, some have performed better, some have not performed better. Therefore, Punjab comes in the category of not performing. So I think this is a shock to all of the citizens who are concerned about Punjab. So that is one of the very important problem. So one of the, I would like to say that this book is not only on pandemic shock, but this is also looking into the shock related short-term problems or challenges. But we have also looked into the long-term challenges, medium-term and long-term challenges which are being faced by the economy from the last several years or 4 decades ago at least. So if we look at this, the book noted very clearly the per capita income ranking of Punjab is sinking in the last 4 decades. And this is need to be taken care of. So poverty was lowest after Green Revolution, but this has remained in the last 4 decades stable, nearly at 6%. Even multidimensional poverty index, which is recently calculated on the earlier figures, that is also giving the same kind of. Social indicators are expected to move at a faster rate, but they are moving slowly, still lag behind in other dynamic states like EGROW. So we can say the policy paralysis in Punjab is longer, 4 decades old. So public policy focus on populism and development left to the private sector of the economy. So therefore you'll find it is nothing bad that the private sector can play an important role, but the East Asian experience shows that we need to have a balance between the state and the markets, a right kind of balance that works. So I think that is the balance which has lost from the last 4 decades, and the Indian economy after 3 decades of policy reform is losing that kind of thing. So I think that Indian economy is also going to in Punjab way soon. So it is this book gives a policy lesson that we should have we have to rethink, restructure, reinvent, be innovative, to have a right kind of balance between the two institutions, that is the market and the state. So from populism to a direct support, we need to engage ourselves as a developmental state, and then you'll find that the people should be engaged in the development process. Now, few lessons from agriculture sector of the economy, that I think that agriculture needs a new directions, which is indicated by the book, and both Professor Sukhpal as well as Professor Kamal Vatta has quite substantially talked about. To my understanding is that both institutional and production system requires a shift, and this is suggested very clearly by the book. So what is required here? What is required in books suggest is that we require infrastructural switching and institutional switching. Until it is not happened, we can beat the drum to diversify, to do new things, new varieties, everything. But until there is a infrastructure switching and there is a institutional switching, if it is not done and public investment has not been done in this new directions, we cannot be able to achieve. This is the lesson from the book. Now, very importantly, the Punjab agriculture is very highly developed, but low public capital formation. This is a strange kind of thing, and therefore you'll find that it is a deficiency in the investment that is striking the structural transformation of the economy, whether it is a private or it is a public. But I think that public crowds in private investment. So if you withdraw public, then you'll find that in the less developed countries, it's a crowding out investment rather than crowding in private investment. So systematic change is required that should benefits of value added that should be returned to the primary producers. So I think that the development process, if initiated, the institutional arrangements should be done in a manner that value addition should not go away from them. Rather, it should be returned back to the primary producers. This is the case not only of agriculture production, but also the dairy farming and other allied occupations as well. Now, strangely enough, that the engine of Punjab economy should have been the industrial sector of the economy. Any economy in the world till date transformed from a backward to a developed countries, agriculture, industrial sector has played an engine of growth. Now we have here this engine of growth is already fatigued. It is suffering from near stagnation. The rate of growth is decelerating. It was 1% in prior to this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. So therefore, we have to take care of very seriously about this sector. So informal sector in the economy is predominant. I think that the Punjab economy from the very beginning, even prior to 1991, was the highly privatized economies in the world. So in India, this was a leading privatized economy in the world, except that agriculture production procurement was done by the government of India. That was only because of the reason very well known food security. So therefore, this is a highly privatized economy, but privatization experience in India has not developed well for the Punjab economy because it was already having where it was. So therefore, you'll find that we have a serious problem. So workers are facing income security because large amount of workers are in the informal sector, in the household sector, in the household industry, or in the agriculture sector of the economy. So they are facing income insecurity. So this is also, highly migrant dependent state. So both local workers and migrant workers face absence of public policy. There is no public policy enacted as well as put in place that is actually dealing with the workers of the economy. This is an extremely strange case. So extreme nature of privatization, which we have been observing in Punjab, I think that we require a kind of some kind of regulatory mechanism which allows private sector to flourish. So what is required? This book gives a lesson that we need to build a capacity and skill formation of the workforce. The workforce is relatively less educated and less skilled ones. So skill formation is expected to be, especially in the directions of the new economy which is coming into the picture. So what we have to do is that for a small sector economy, if we have to take it out from crisis, we have to, alleviate the credit constraint, and we have to make institutional system so that the small scale should be upward mobile rather than staying where it starts with. So therefore, you'll find that that is the fundamental lesson which we can learn from this book. So now this is a state which is facing, compared to any other state of India, high unemployment rates. And that is a case of both of unskilled and educated skilled people. So that's why you'll find that what the workers or the young workforce is looking at the high unemployment rates and moving out from state either to other parts of India or going abroad. So, the people have an experience to go abroad. So therefore, large number of people, young people are going abroad to be a part of the labor force in those countries. Now, during this pandemic, most of the studies conveys us the females suffered more because of mobility issues. Therefore, we have to carefully look into the employment opportunities for the female workforce. Now, what is the lesson from this book? That is, we need to give entitlement assets and land for sustainability of occupation and income. So, the most of the workforce is landless, that is SC category, and therefore you'll find that they lacks entitlements to assets. Even the Shamlat land is not being, given. A lot of struggles are being, watched. Wherever that is given, they are going to give you good returns, their stability in terms of income. So what is required in this book is suggesting that we have to establish the rural enterprises in India. So entrepreneurship need to be unleashed to transform agriculture to generate productive employment. So therefore, you'll find that we have to go for rural enterprises. Now, services sector contributes almost 47.8% of the state domestic product. Its rate of growth, even the prior to this pandemic period, was more than 7%. So therefore, you'll find this is the most important sector of the economy, but has a serious problem. For example, already talked about healthcare and education is in shambles. And you'll find that recently the COVID-19 pandemic shock has, not due to shortage of income, most of the wards of young children have withdrawn their children from private schools and put them in the public school because of the income losses which has occurred, and they are not able to enable themselves to that. So the enrollment in the government schools have increased. Therefore, what is important is that government schools are without teachers, without infrastructure. So I think that is the kind of, and in the colleges and universities, you will find that from the last 15-20 years period of time, they have not appointed faculty, and colleges are without faculty. And this is a very strange kind of occupation, problem which has occurred. Lowest expenditure has been incurred by the state over the last 4 decades, destroyed the well-functioning educational and healthcare system, and that is without essential manpower. So pandemic shock has clearly bring out that without a trained and a regular healthcare workers, the most of the deaths have occurred. And because the new workers which are temporary, they have not took risks to save the human lives. And I think they were not trained also, they were not skilled also. So therefore, you'll find that this is the state of health and educational institutions, which are very, very important. But the services sector is expected to provide public goods, and public goods worldwide known by the studies as well as policymakers that they generates increasing return to scale. If we have to revive Punjab economy, we have to ensure the public goods which are essential to revive or bring in increasing return to scale rather than decreasing return to scale. There you can arrest the falling of income. There you will arrest the people are moving abroad because they consider there is no dynamism in the economy and problem. Now, the very neglected aspect which has been studied by this book and the lessons which are emerging are important. Now, the philanthropy has hugely appreciated worldwide of the Punjabis, but they do not fulfill the basic needs in the sense promoted by United Nations. So basic needs are not being fulfilled, even though there is a lot of philanthropy. So philanthropy has to relook into the inadequacy of the services which they have been providing. What is required here is diversification and balanced food and widening of the basis of the basic needs, which is very, very important. So the another important lesson which emerged from diaspora, that is, they have also, wherever they are living, there is an inadequacy of health care, educational institutions, diet and lifestyle changes are required over there as well. So therefore, they do have a lot of potential to contribute to the Punjab economy, which is unexploited. But you'll find that in the pandemic period, they have also suffered a lot, which need to be noted in terms of they have to, indulge in collective action as farmers did, and shown in the COVID period time that the collective action makes a lot of difference. So that is, they have to secure health as well as educational services wherever they have been living. Now, almost moving towards end, the full revenue collection has not happened in the last 40 years period of time. So 4 decades have passed, 30 years of elected continuously peaceful time governments have happened in Punjab. The full collection of revenue has not occurred. And this has allowed us to have a nearly 3 lakh crores of debt on the head of the state of Punjab and Punjabis. And I think that the citizens have to seriously think about, the politician has to seriously think about that if you are not, recovering and collecting full revenue which is required and is possibility to collect, then you'll find that the debt is the option which has been chosen by the politicians, and politicians have and bureaucrats have grown rich, but you will find that the fiscal policy dies functional. So therefore, you'll find that the right amount and right prices of the natural resources. Punjab is rich in natural resources, but you'll find that it is being, exploited more than, the way it should have been. But you'll find that the revenue contribution is little because the right kind of pricing and, and the rent-seeking behavior which is going on has created a severe kind of problem. So union government's excessive intervention in terms of central-state relations and these agricultural laws, 3 agricultural laws is a symbol. GST is another. Demonetization was also there. The Punjab small industry could not recover after demonetization. So one has to look into that how Punjab has fundamentally affected by the central government's policies. But you will find that if central government allows irregular trade through land route, perhaps all those kind of limitations which are being created can be unfolded. And you'll find Punjab and the northern region in India, Haryana, Rajasthan, then you'll find that the Jammu and Kashmir and Himachal Pradesh can benefit a lot. And that is the important recommendation of this book. So we have to revamp the fiscal policy, but what we have to do is rationalize subsidies, which, basically the subsidies are targeted for excessive benefits to the private sector. If you look at PPAs done by the state government with the private agencies to contract electricity per unit, even from the sun energy, 17.50 rupees per unit was a agreement reached with the various private agencies. And then you'll find that the electricity in Punjab was sold out nearly 6 to 7 rupees per unit. That was highly. Nowadays, they have reduced 3 rupees, but you'll find that still PPAs are fundamental, which is if low rates electricity is to be given, huge amount of burden on the public exchequer. We have recommended it in the book that you'll find that the electricity rates, if reduced, PPAs are revised, then you'll find that Punjab can save a lot of resources, and even the agriculture subsidy will become smallest amount, which perhaps nobody could have thought of. So you'll find that it will not be a burden. It will be rather a little help to the agriculture sector of the economy. It will both help at the WTO level to contest as well as the national level and the state level. It is going to have a benefit to the farmers in terms of minimum support prices. You will also have to account for, and it will reduce that cost also. So the most important problem which is highlighted and challenge of the policy here is how to dismantle the gridlock between the bureaucracy and a ruling political elite. They even do not adhere to the advice of the experts, and even you will find that in all the institutions Professor Sukhpal has talked, either they are dysfunctional, even if they are little bit functional, no expert of the nature is hired or involved in the policy decision making at all. So therefore, this is a problem. So transformation of the state from a security concern you know, this is a border state, and internal external security is very important. But what is important is that we have to convert a state from a security concern to a developmental concerned state. So what we have to do is we have to revamp and re-energize governance institutions, which is amply stated how these can be done in this particular book. Thank you very much for listening patiently to me and giving me an opportunity, especially to all of us, especially at EGROW Foundation, when you'll find that this talk is this is organized. So I think this is, I would like to now stop sharing, and thank
So,
you.
thank you, Professor Lakhwinder, for coming out with some supplementary excellent observations regarding the problems which are deep rooted basically in the Punjab economy, and in the light of that, suggesting some public policy and governance reforms, which is the dire need of the time. Thank you so much for highlighting whatsoever supplementary is in your book. And in fact, I think this book has a lot more uh, to be studied rather than just giving the explanation or the presentation through the presenters itself. So I think here it is the this is all from the side of the discussants. Now it's the time for some observations made by the audience. House is open. May I now ask?
I
Yeah,
think
Yes,
Charan
please.
Singh is expected
Professor
to speak.
Charan Singh.
Charan
yeah,
Singh is expected to speak.
yes,
Yes,
Dr.
please,
Charan Singh is
please.
yeah,
expected to speak.
Yes,
Charan,
please.
yeah,
Firstly, Professor Charan Singh, then probably Professor Bishan Das ji. Please,
yes.
please. This one, thank you. Professor
I
Charan
must,
Singh, over to you,
yeah,
please.
thank you. I must thank you for the book and sending us the soft copy and also giving such a detailed presentation. I must thank all four of you, Professor Kuldil, for setting the tone, and then Professor Sukhpal, Professor Vatta, and Professor Gill to give us the details of the book. Now, very fortunate that I had the chance to read through the book earlier, and now once these presentations were made, it helps me really make a very 360-degree rounded evaluation of the study. I have absolutely no inhibition in saying it is really a pioneering work and something which is not only relevant for Punjab, its timing is so good, it is also relevant for the whole country. Because at this point of time, everybody in Delhi, everybody that I meet, every forum that I go, the thought is how are we going to revive the economy? And therefore, here is a book which is saying these are the ways to revive the economy. Almost every chapter has way forward, and I think the experts who have been invited, so many of them, I think nearly 3 dozen, and those 22 chapters, each chapter has a way forward, and then each expert has given the best they could give. So I really thank the three editors. I thank Professor Kuldeep for giving us this complete picture around the book. My comments are, my first comment is an excellent book, something I really enjoyed. As Professor Vatta said, it's enjoyable, it's light reading, but let me say it is light reading, but you see the depth of analysis in each chapter. So I enjoy it. So I never felt that this is a shallow work or this is off the cuff. It really showed that the professors and the scholars who have written the chapters have done good, solid work behind them. Nevertheless, I have a few thoughts and I'm going to share those. I especially read the chapter on banking, and I must tell you, it's a very good chapter. Also read the chapter on MSMEs. I think that's another very good chapter. The fiscal chapter, I always love to speak on fiscal, and I think it's a good chapter. Way forward is good, but that is one chapter of the few that I read rigorously. I felt that it could have been strengthened, and I'm sure the next time when the authors write, they would already strengthen it. They themselves would know while reading the book that this was a little weak chapter there. Nevertheless, it does flag the issues of GST, GST collection, and all those areas. Now, my problem is, and of course, the introductory chapter is so well written by the three authors. and the last chapter is also so well written by the three authors, gives you a complete picture. So I must thank everybody for this excellent work which has been done at this time. And especially this time, I keep saying, because the budget has yet to be made in Delhi and in state governments has yet to be initiated. So the timing is very good. But let me just ask a few questions. I was reading this chapter on agriculture, and Haryana has already started talking about crop diversity. Now, I myself lived in Punjab and did my early schooling years in Punjab from 1971, just before the war started. We shifted to Punjab and we were there till 74. The crop diversification, and I did some studies after that. Nearly 24 types of crops used to grow there, and the taste of the crop and the quality of the crop and the soil quality was so rich, the water quality was so rich. I again went back to Punjab in 1980 and stayed there again for 4 years. Things had deteriorated. And then, of course, once I joined the job, go there often, and I keep feeling that Punjab has water, air, earth, and crop deteriorated. The taste of the crop has deteriorated. Now, wheat and rice, we all know, I need not belabor that point. But then what surprised me most was in the chapter, while Haryana has taken the lesson to crop diversify and take care of the water table, the scholars in Punjab still think that they can continue to focus on wheat rice combination. And all that it needs is some better way and method of irrigation. I think somewhere some of us need to come out and go back forcefully and argue, like Haryana has adopted, we also need to go back for crop diversification. So that is my thought, and I know the authors are experts on agriculture. I also know Professor Kuldil is much better on Punjab economy than I am, but these were one thought that I had. Now, to revive the economy, we will have to also look at sunrise industries. The rest of the country is benefiting extensively from pharma industry, and I did not find much in the book on that, even in the way forward. MSMEs, the chapter, as I said, is reasonably well written. I liked it. But even in the MSMEs, I was thinking if we need to go and diversify and look at other things and create more hubs in MSMEs, I did not find that being discussed extensively in the book. The export sector, to my mind, is also very important. And that again, I found that in MSMEs chapter, some reference was given, but not other than that. In any case, the book as I read it and the presentations that I heard today, I felt that the presentations were very highly motivated and pretty forward looking. Whereas while reading the book, I still felt that that forward looking part, as came out in the presentation, is not becoming apparent in the book. So overall, if you ask me, I'll say an excellent book, an excellent initiative. I would like to thank the authors for having taken this initiative, certainly pioneering, and will stand out in the recovery plan for public policymakers. So thanks for it. And these little lacunas that I just mentioned, maybe I have by oversight lost them in the book, or maybe when next time the authors work on this, they'll work and focus more on it. Thank you very much. And now I hand over back to the chairperson, Professor Kuldil.
Thank you, Professor Charan, for giving a very good feedback to the editors as well as the wonderful observations. Now, may I request Professor Bishandas, please to comment something or give his observations?
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, Professor, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Professor Kuldeep, or thanks. All the three speakers, Dr. Sukhpal Singh, Kamal Vatta, and Lakhwinder Singh ji, they made an excellent presentation. It was a masterful exposition. Charan Singh has made very pertinent points. So, and I agree with him, but I don't have to repeat that. My comments will be focused on agriculture, and a very good treatment has been given in the book and analysis, and more you have brought out in a very succinct way in the presentation. Now, 2-3 things I would like to put across the table. First, when you say the cost has treatment to the cost because you have taken on board the financial cost that is to the farmers income. So my suggestion, rather my thought is we have to work out the domestic resource cost DRC to see what is happening in the overall economy. Unless we do it, we will not reach to the very rational inference, because our inference, if it is not based on, for instance, now water tables are going down, and it is because I don't blame the farmers of Punjab because they overproduce rice and wheat, and the country do not need that much. On the other day, I was talking to the chairman of the FCI, Mr. Atish Chandra. He says 100 million tons of rice and wheat are with them, and our buffer requirement, our strategic buffer requirement is just about 35 to 40 million tons. So we are 2.5 times of our. So for what? For whom we are producing? Even assuming we are able to export that excess rice. And rice is a water guzzling crop. That means so much water, virtual water, we are exporting at the cost of our domestic citizens, and we are short of water. That is point one. India is a very peculiar country when it comes to subsidy, because we focus both on input subsidy as well as the output subsidy. That means you are giving the subsidy on fertilizer. Urea is a case in point. Rupees 5,360 per ton of the urea that has been going for many years. We are not able to, for whatever reason, but that also leads to overuse of fertilizer, and everybody is suffering because of excess use of fertilizer, and our policy bias has resulted in this. And you see how many cancer patients are suffering with cancer. So there is a causal relationship between the overuse of fertilizer on one hand and the incidence of cancer. Now, this is unacceptable. No cost is high when it comes to the health issues. Now, we are not about this. And here also, we have to highlight the policy bias in the government. And the policy bias is we assure the farmers whatever you produce, we'll procure. Right? And that is also preventing our farmers from diversifying. That is one main reason. And so we have to take into account that, and that is we are not doing enough to diversify, because what is demand, because production has to be calibrated in sync with the demand. That means from fog to field, and that means we have to first see what is the demand, and demand of which commodity, then calibrate the production. And many countries are doing that, but we are producing what is convenient, and then regardless of the demand. So this cannot go on and on. That is one. And when you talk of the productivity, now productivity, I would like the authors to distinguish between productivity and yield, because yield is the production per unit of area, whereas productivity has to be compressive total factor productivity. That means you have to see the land, labor, and capital. So those factors, I think, must be taken into account on this. But I must compliment once again the author of the book and the editor. They have done a very great job. But these are the issues I thought I must flag on, and that really concerns us. Thank you, Professor Kuldil Kaur, for giving an opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Vishandas ji. Anybody, house is open now. If anybody from the house or the audience has any observation to make, he or she is most welcome, please.
Dr. Charan Singh, this is Subramanian of Reserve Bank, and it's very clear indication that excess production is in some specific rice and wheat and all that beyond consumer preference and requirement. There is a need to conduct a very detailed study on consumerism in this country, and then see that there is a match. There is no huge mismatch between consumer demand requirement as also the production levels, and perhaps this needs a little deeper thing at the India as a whole, and also you were talking about the exports, which will have to be taken into consideration because the food habits and preferences of people have changed. Do you think it is correct? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Subramanian. Anybody else, please? I think any one of the editors, if they want to comment, then we can take it later on once all the observations are clear. Hello.
Yes. I think that Sukhpal and Vatta should take up these two questions, especially on agriculture.
Right. That, please. That's right. Professor Sukhpal or Professor Vatta, any one of you. Professor Subramanian, may I request you please mute your mic, please?
Yeah.
Kamal, you need to unmute.
Sorry.
This is in response to Professor Vishandas on the increasing area, and still we are talking a lot about crop diversification. It was the Professor Sukhpal started in the beginning from this, and you see from 1986 when Professor Joel talked about diversification, and I have a slide where it shows that whenever we talked about crop diversification, whenever there was an expert committee report, the next year the area under paddy increased rather than decreasing, and the reason is the price signals and assured procurement. So this is related, we can relate it in the post-COVID period as well. You see, when we did a study and we collected the data, many things changed with the farmers, but not the cropping pattern, because this is the most if we look into the production and marketing risk for these two crops, this is the least as compared to any other alternative. So there have to be mechanisms. We have to look into the markets, and then we have to ensure the income in a comparative or much better, higher manner. As Professor Sukhpal talked about high value crops yesterday in the crop diversification workshop we had in Chandigarh. So we are into a low level equilibrium, but issue is that even with this lower level equilibrium, it doesn't provide any incentive to move to other crops which are even less remunerative. So we have exceptions like high value crops, but then the production and marketing risk is very high. So whenever we talked about, even in the last 4 or 5 years, the area under paddy increased from 2.8 to 3 million or even more than 3 million hectares. So I think these are the price signals and the risk which has to be considered. Thank you very much.
If I may add, I think Charan had pointed towards that point. That is that Haryana has taken a lead in moving farmers away from paddy by putting in place tangible measures like even cash transfers. But Punjab has somehow, I don't mind saying this, Punjab has not seriously tried. Punjab has been perpetuating wheat paddy. Yesterday, even the former chairperson of the Farmers Commission said it in public forum, that Punjab has been doing rent seeking for its own purposes, the Punjab government, in terms of sticking to wheat paddy as the dominant MSP based crops of the state. So I think there is a lot of questioning which need to be done at the state level It has not even tried. Haryana is at least trying new crops, procuring them at MSP, giving 7,500 rupees per acre to farmers who grow other crops other than paddy. But Punjab has not attempted even a single day. Punjab has not even ever attempted MIS for any of the crops which doesn't have MSP to support their market intervention scheme. So that is the state of affairs. That's why we say it's very badly governed in terms of policy and institutions. Thank you.
Any other response? I think
Dr.
Professor
Kuldil,
Charan.
can I also respond to this?
Sure, sir.
I think that the two questions raised regarding the cropping pattern, which is perpetuated over a long period of time in Punjab, and Punjab is always suggested from the mid 80s till now that it should have moved out from this kind of cropping pattern. What has happened, why this is not happening? I think there is a lot of analysis has taken place over the years. And if we forget about when we ask a question and when we engaged in dialogue like this, we should not forget about the issue that Punjab as a public policy by the central government as well as of the state government jointly, coordinatedly, has pushed Punjab towards this direction, where it is now. Now, that direction was a food security issue, and I think that the human security, United Nations has defined food security still is an issue in India because the shortages, the surpluses which are artificial surpluses, and we are not able to fulfill in terms of the requirements which we are expected to fulfill, especially the reports after reports stating that there is a undernutrition population, there is a population which is suffering from all the kind of problems which are from the malnutrition. So I think we are not able to provide as a nation to the food to the needy, and especially the states in India where you have a larger proportion of poverty which is continuing still. So I think this is the area where there is a lot of debate and discussion is required. But my take is that if and when in the mid 80s Punjab started doing it, the farmers responded very well. And they have diversified hugely in terms of Kamal Vatta. You may know that we have grapes sold out in the market at 1 rupees per kilogram. And hugely the Malwa region has diversified to new crops, but market crashed during that particular period of time. Even today, Punjab produces everything in bulk. Even if vegetables, even if fruits, when Punjab's bumper crops comes in, the markets crashed. The potatoes, everything you see that time to time we have seen that markets are crashing, not giving even the minimum amount of cost which they have incurred on the crops. Now that's why the question which is being asked here also is that switching, why switching is to be done by the government if, say, for example, that the production is private. So I think this is a mismatch between the kind of policy which we have pursued and now the kind of efforts which are required to diversify Punjab. I think that I agree that diversification is required, and if you even talk to the farmers, they also want it. Then what is inhibiting them? That is the kind of missing link which we have to look into. Historically, we have given them a specialization. Now, all of a sudden, we say that we will not help you, but we will withdraw your specialization. I think that is the conflict which has for a 1 year period of time has occurred on the borders of Delhi. So we have to look into very seriously that nobody is blocking diversification. I think it's a systemic failure to diversify the Punjab economy, and I bet Haryana will not diversify the smallest amount of efforts which has been put forward. We need a large amount of efforts. A big bang effort is required to diversify, and that requires switching cost. Who will bear the switching cost? I think those who have benefited for a long period of time from the last 50, 60 years period of time. If a nation has benefited, nation has a little cost to put forward to diversify Punjab economy. And I think when you say that when was a need, you are a good one. When we don't need you, you are a bad one. I think that is the kind of bad policy. We need to understand that center and state both has to coordinate, and coordinated efforts can diversify Punjab economy. Punjab's people are very dynamic. They do not perpetuate what they're given, but what they do is better than others. They can do better than others. No state in India till date, if Punjab stops growing both wheat and rice, can give a food security to the country, because of the kind of investment which has gone into it. You'll find that this huge investment is required to diversify. Is the center and the state government is willing to do that? I will bet that Punjab itself will never be able to do until central government comes in some kind of help to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lakhwinder. Me also is of the opinion that every problem with the facilitation of market or assured marketing is there, then diversification can take place in no way. Then the cost switching can also be covered, and every problem in which is being faced through the diversification can be taken care of. Now, I think Professor Charan, Professor Bishandas, and Professor Subramaniam, you have got the answer to your queries, please.
Thank you. Really, the last professor had very correctly put everything in proper perspective. Excellent conference. Thanks to EGROW and Dr. Charan Singh and you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Subramanian. There were some chats in the chat box put by some of the audience. They were asking about how to source this book, and probably Professor Sukhpal has answered this, that it's available in the market as well as online. Am I right for that matter, please?
I think it is available everywhere now. So
okay,
anybody can buy from the online, or a hard copy is available with the booksellers, because publisher has already distributed the book.
Yes, please. Thank you, Professor Charan. Am I allowed to wind up the thesis by wishing good luck to all the editors, please? Wish good luck to the editors. And
Thank you.
I think I should now hand over the mic to Professor Charan Singh, if any of the announcement he has to make at this forum, please. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much,
everybody. Thank you, the presenters as well as the audience. Thank you very much from my side.
Thank you, Professor Kuldil. That was very kind of you chairing the session. Yes. Thank you, Professor Kuldil, for chairing the session. We had really a very interesting session, and the discussion has been very rich. And I must thank all the three authors to have come out with PowerPoint, and that drove home the point so very well. If the three authors think appropriate, you could share the PowerPoint with us. Tomorrow by noon, we will put the today's discussion on website, and we can put all the three PowerPoints there also. Why I say so is because once again, this is a pioneering work. This will help the policymakers across the country. And as you know, much access to our webinars take place on Saturdays and Sundays when policymakers have time to dwell upon it. So that will help us. I want to thank each of the participants in the discussion today. We had a very high participation despite the fact that at EGROW's end we blundered. We by mistake sent a wrong link, though we later on tried to rectify it. Despite that, we had a very good audience today. To make things easier, I want to just mention that we are aware that the year end is approaching us, and for the year end, we also have lovely webinars organized. On December 16, Sarah Valerie from IMF is presenting her new book, forthcoming book, from the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF, How to Achieve Inclusive Growth, How to Achieve Inclusive Growth, published by Oxford University. The book will be out in the market sometimes in January. Sarah Valeri, the Assistant Director at IMF, will be giving us a bird's eye view into the book. Very important book. I have had a chance to listen to this and know about this book. So I wanted her to make a presentation so that we all who are busy in policy making for the budget can take some lessons from that book. I would invite you on December 16, Thursday, 5:30 to 6:30, Sarah Valeri presenting her book. On December 17, our usual slot on a Friday, we have Ambassador Sybil speaking to us on important elements of India's foreign policy. Important elements of India's foreign policy. This seminar is on December 17 from 3 to 4 p.m. and Ambassador Sybil will be speaking to us. December 24, we have another presentation from a professor from Texas. And December 31, I know I'm treading on a very thin ice. December 24 is eve of Christmas. We have a professor from Texas. And December 31 is again the year end. And we have Professor Ishita, psychologist, making a presentation on post-COVID challenges for women and children in India. So with this, the whole month is four webinars outlined in front of you for the rest of the month. Look forward to your participation in each one of them. Once again, for today's presentation, chairing the session and the author's contribution, I thank Professor Kuldil, Professor Sukhpal, Professor Vatta, Professor Gill, as well as all the participants who have sat through with us for nearly 2 hours today. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you to
Thank you,
EGROW
everybody.
Foundation
Thank you.
and Kuldil Kaur and all the participants for
Thank you.
being with
Thank you.
us.
My pleasure always. My pleasure
you.
always.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody. Please.